new epoch. I don't mean to say that, but it does acknowledge that this kind of feedback loop, that an organism changing the other organisms around it. Every living thing does that, but to the extent that we're conscious, we're doing it on purpose, and we're doing it across a larger swath of the evolutionary tree. You know, there are ants that kind of farm aphids, and they kind of keep them as food, and they're, that's kind of one example, but we do this across the board. And that's worthy of acknowledging in some fashion. So the word post-natural was, in some respects, and I hope this isn't disappointing, but it was convenient because it hadn't been defined, and it was a word, and it was kind of hiding in plain sight. So it's something that people had sort of kicked around here and there, but nobody had really tied a definition to it, so I grabbed it.
I really wonder what it means, post-natural. It may be useful in the beginning of such a project, but we are primates, excessively intelligent primates, so we are part of nature. You could argue that our whole culture is interwoven with nature. So I always wonder how realistic the dichotomy between culture and nature is. That distinction has always been made, but
yeah.
But should it be pursued?
I definitely do not want to emphasize the dichotomy. In some respects, it comes from the definition of nature that's used by natural history museums. So they'll always say, well, everything's nature. They always want to put a bigger box over everything. But in practice, they're not. In practice, they're not interested in these kinds of organisms. They are alternately bored by them, or feel that their resources aren't sufficient to explore this new territory. There's any number of excuses I've encountered. But for the most part, and certainly the naturalis here is actually an exception. For the most part, it's entirely ignored. So by taking their working definition of nature as exists in practice in a natural history museum, then we can create the concept of post-natural just in response to it. So in some sense, it's reactive.
My sense to the word post-natural is also that, and I think that's where we are moving away from, is that there was once this thing called nature, and that this was a static thing, and it was out there, and it was just there, and then people came. And we started spoiling everything, and spoiling the environment, altering organisms, and there's also a moral part.